For 30 years, England tore itself apart over a single object, the crown. Not a war against a foreign enemy, but a family at war with itself. Cousin against cousin, brother against brother, in a series of brutal battles that killed kings, wiped out noble houses, and ended a royal dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries. Later ages gave the conflict a strangely beautiful name, the Wars of the Roses, after the emblem said to mark the 2 sides. A red rose for the House of Lancaster, a white rose for the House of York. Behind that gentle image lies one of the bloodiest chapters in English history, a story of ambition, revenge, betrayal, and a throne that changed hands again and again. To understand the wars, you have to start with a family tree, a dangerous one. Both sides, Lancaster and York, were branches of the same dynasty, the Plantagenets, and both descended from a single 14th century king, Edward III. Edward had many sons, and that was the problem. Each son founded a powerful line, and each line in time could argue that it had the better claim to the throne. For decades, the question stayed buried, but a disputed crown is like a fault line in the rock, invisible, until the pressure builds, and one day the whole ground splits along it. All it would take was a weak king, and England was about to get one. That king was Henry VI. He was gentle, pious, and generous, and utterly unfit to rule. Where England needed a warrior and a politician, it got a man more suited to a monastery who at times sank into episodes of complete mental collapse, unable to speak or recognize anyone for months. Under him, England lost almost everything it had won in the long war with France, and the royal government fell into debt, corruption, and the grip of unpopular favorites. Into this vacuum stepped a powerful, capable cousin, Richard, Duke of York, a man with his own strong claim to the throne, a grudge against the men around the king, and an army at his back. At first, Richard of York insisted he wanted only to reform the government, not to take the crown. But in a court full of enemies, distrust hardened into violence. In 1455, at the town of St Albans, York and his allies met the king's forces in a short, sharp clash in the streets. It was less a battle than a brawl by later standards, but blood was spilled, royal favorites were killed, and the king himself was captured. The line had been crossed. What had been a political quarrel was now a war, and the great families of England began to divide, gathering their tenants and retainers into private armies and choosing a side, the red rose or the white. The war swung violently back and forth. Richard of York was killed in battle, his head mockingly crowned with paper and mounted on the walls of the city of York. But his son took up the cause, and he was everything Henry was not: young, tall, charismatic, and a gifted soldier. In 1461, at Towton, the two sides met in a snowstorm, in what is remembered as the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. Tens of thousands dead in a single day. The Yorkists won decisively. Henry fled, and Richard's son was crowned King Edward IV. For a moment, it seemed the wars were over. They were not, because of one man. Edward's greatest supporter was his cousin, the Earl of Warwick, so rich and so powerful that he earned a nickname that echoes through history, the Kingmaker. Warwick had helped put Edward on the throne, but when the young king married for love and slighted him, Warwick did the unthinkable. He switched sides. He allied with his old enemies, drove Edward out of the kingdom, and briefly restored poor Henry VI to the throne he had already lost. It was an astonishing reversal. But Edward returned, and in 1471, at the battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury, he destroyed his enemies. Warwick was killed. Henry's only son died in the fighting. Henry himself died in the Tower soon after. The House of Lancaster was, it seemed, extinguished. Edward IV ruled at last in peace, until he died suddenly in 1483, leaving the throne to his 12-year-old son. And here, the story takes its darkest turn. The boy king and his younger brother were placed in the Tower of London, supposedly for their protection, under the care of their uncle, Edward's brother, Richard. Within weeks, Richard had declared the boys illegitimate and taken the crown himself as Richard III, and the two princes were never seen again. What happened to them remains one of history's most famous mysteries. But for centuries, most have believed the boys were murdered and that their uncle gave the order. Richard III's seizure of the throne split even his own side. Many who had served the House of York now turned against him, and their eyes fell on the last man with a drop of Lancastrian blood, an exile in France named Henry Tudor, whose claim to the throne was thin, but whose enemies were many. In 1485, Henry landed with a small army, and the two met at Bosworth Field. There, betrayed by allies who held back at the crucial moment, Richard III charged headlong at his rival and was cut down, fighting, the last king of England ever to die in battle. On the field, the fallen crown was said to be picked from a thorn bush and set upon Henry's head. Henry Tudor became King Henry VII, but a battlefield crown is a fragile thing, and he knew it. To end the feud for good, he did something shrewd. He married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV and heiress of the rival house. With that marriage, the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York were joined, quite literally, into a single new emblem, the Tudor Rose, red and white together. A last Yorkist revolt was crushed at the Battle of Stoke in 1487, and with it, the wars finally, truly ended. Two houses that had bled each other white for a generation were fused into one. So ended the Wars of the Roses, and began the age of the Tudors, one of the most famous dynasties in history, ending only with Elizabeth I. But the wars left a longer shadow than their battles. It was the Tudors, and later the playwright Shakespeare, who shaped how we remember them, casting Richard III as a villainous hunchback and their own victory as the healing of a broken land. Even the tidy image of red roses against white was largely a later invention. The name Wars of the Roses was popularized centuries afterward. The truth was messier and more human, not a clean clash of two colors, but a long, grinding struggle within one family over the oldest prize of all, and a reminder of how fragile the line between order and chaos can be when the question of who should rule has no clear answer.